Hi everyone, I'm just looking at the background here. I may make more videos from this room rather than the room I usually make them in. Quite like this little background. If you're wondering, that is a print of uh, Rembrandt, a self-portrait print of Rembrandt. I got it in one of the broadsheets a few years back. So if you didn't come across my last video, I have said that I'm going to make a big change on the channel. Now, this won't affect subscribers and it won't really affect the sort of content that I put out. It will be broadly similar things. I'm going to continue doing that. But at some point, possibly later tonight, I may try and find a way to change my channel's name. That is if it's viable with YouTube. I don't know if they allow you to do that once or twice. But it's just a reminder if you didn't see that video because it's something I've wanted to do for a while. I just feel that centrist philosopher, the centrist bit I'll stick with, but the philosopher bit, I always intended it as a sort of tongue-in-cheek thing. Um, but I just feel it's a little bit, I don't know. I just no longer want to use it because I feel that some people would come across the channel and think the philosopher bit's a bit like I see myself as a philosopher. Well, I do a lot of thinking, but yeah. So I may drop that. I don't know. It's just I feel that changing the name of the channel would be a good way to reboot the channel. I may even keep Philosopher in it. Who knows? But we'll see what happens. Now, what I want to talk about in this one is the Labour Party. A big part of that's Keir Starmer as leader and as Prime Minister, but perhaps I'll speak more about Starmer when we come up to the 1 year mark, which isn't far off now. But the Labour Party, I made a video recently on Reform. And the basic overview that I had of Reform is that I don't entirely trust them. I've no intention to vote for them. There's a lot of areas that don't sit well with me regarding the Reform Party. I don't trust them on foreign policy. I think Farage is far too cosy with Donald Trump. He's a sycophant. I don't think there's any other way around it. The other thing is he's kind of like, I feel Reform's like a one-man party. There's other people in it, like Lee Anderson and Andrew Tice, but it's one of those things whereby Farage is kind of taken all. It's the Farage party, and if they were to do worse than they expect in the next election, I think they'll probably do reasonably well. But if they weren't to do well, Farage will just go out and form yet another party because that's what he's always done. We need to remember that Reform is just the latest reincarnation of UKIP or Brexit Party. It keeps kind of shedding its skin and getting a new name, and that in itself should warrant some question marks about consistency. Um, it's I'd wonder about that. There are some things I would say that Reform are more in tune with than other parties. It has to be said they are the only party to have backed a full independent inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. I think, despite their attitude to last summer's riots, in which they just blamed it all on immigration, I do think Reform will probably be hardline on crime. I'm hardline on crime. I back that. But I would strongly disagree with Reform on a lot of other areas. I mean, I mentioned Russia. When it comes to Israel and the Palestinians, I think they'd be absolutely biased towards Israel. Um, like I said, there's the pandering to Trump. I'm talking about this again because before I talk about the Labour Party, I think they face a threat from Reform. They may face a threat from the Liberal Democrats, and it may be that it's worth making a video about the Liberal Democrats, and I may get round to doing that. But like I say, I don't absolutely disagree with everything Reform stands for. Some of their positions, for example, on extreme woke dogma, I would agree with. Um, Another thing that has to be said, Reform is really the only party, apart from the Tories, but they're kind of only jumping on the bandwagon, to raise concerns about freedom of speech in this country. Now, one of my biggest issues with the Liberal Democrats is they should be in the absolute forefront of that. The Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey and his colleagues, should be absolutely shouting from the rooftops about the disgraceful travesty that people get 6 officers knocking on the door for a social media post. Why is Ed Davey silent on that? Or if they have said anything, it's been, very muted and peripheral to what they deem to be a priority. Now, I would have thought that party calling itself the Liberal Democrats would be on the forefront of that. If I had one question for the Lib Dems, it would be that. Why are you not being more vocal about the assault on free speech in this country? Um, I think, just briefly on that point, I think any police chief that endorses it, that thinks it's a priority for them to send officers to someone's home because of some social media post that isn't involving any threat, I think that is an utter disgrace, and they're a disgrace to their uniform. I was very disappointed by the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. I don't, I can't recall his name off the top of my head, but he had been kind of a prototype of a good police officer. He'd advocate back to basics policing, deal with crime, deal with the sort of things people are concerned about, antisocial behaviour and so on. He's just come out and said that he will go after every crime, including non-crime hate incidents, or he will go after every incident, and that has caused a lot of disappointment. I think it's a disgrace. If he thinks that the public want to see that happening, he's got it dead wrong. And worse, maybe he doesn't care. Well, that is tone deaf and it's just wrong. So, with that, like I say, Reform is the only party that seems to care. The Tories are saying they'll scrap non-crime hate incidents, but again, they were in power for 14 years. Why didn't they do it? Um, I think Labour's track record on free speech is not good, and I do not trust Keir Starmer and his party on this issue. But I wouldn't blame it all on Labour. Like I say, the Tories had their chance to abolish this and they didn't. This sort of stuff was happening um, in the Johnson Truss, Sunak years. So why, we can't just say it's a Labour thing. But for Keir Starmer to turn around and say we have a proud history of free speech in this country and ignore what's happening is a disgrace, and it makes me wonder about Labour. A lot's been made of the wife of the Conservative councillor who's got a pretty tough prison sentence, 3 years. She's still in prison. She's been denied access to her child. I had little sympathy with her in the beginning because I thought what she'd done was repugnant and incredibly reckless. And I do actually believe that if people are inciting violence, they should be held to account for it. But I've also come to believe that her sentence is too severe, particularly in the light of the fact that you get domestic abusers who get lighter sentences than that. Some thug beats up his girlfriend, he'll get 2 years. This woman's got 3 years. That's clearly not right. I think she should be released immediately. I think what would have sufficed is a bit of community service, perhaps a fine, and a bit of common sense not to write stupid things online. But I think 3 years in prison, I definitely think she should be released immediately. Um, I know Starmer and his party bristle at the idea of two-tier care and two-tier policing, but it's hard not to conclude that there is double standards going on out there. I don't think policing is consistent at all. I think the prevalence of the police looking into non-crime hate incidents is deeply, deeply concerning. Um, I mean, the clues in the title, non-crime. In other words, really, the police have no business getting involved at all. Initially, it was set up as a way to gauge um, racial tensions in the community and things that might sort of incite future problems. I can understand that, okay, but and I came out of the Stephen Lawrence case, but I think it's got out of control. We now have a situation where police are abusing their power to follow this up. 6 officers, 6 uniformed officers, one case. It's a disgrace. That's not about gauging community tensions. That is about overreach. And in my view, it's a complete abuse of power. I think Labour's track record on this is not good. Um, Yvette Cooper's called on the police to show common sense and to prioritise serious crimes, but that's not good enough. Labour need to go further and announce the end of non-crime hate incidents. and announce that the police should not be involved in this explicitly. That way, police chiefs will have no one to blame but themselves. And if they do follow this up, then it's on them. They can't just say we're following legislation. If there was a formal abolition of this, I don't know what the statute would be. I don't know what form that takes in legislation, but quite clearly it's no longer fit for purpose and it's being abused. And because it's happening on Starmer's watch, it's associated with Starmer and his government. Like I say, the Tories cannot, act squeaky clean on this. It's happening on their watch as well. But Labour has to get a grip and abolish this. Because people associated with two-tier policing, they associate that with the Labour government. Um, there's some things I welcome that Labour's doing. I welcome the attempt to reset with the EU. I think that's an important thing. There's just been a EU summit with, or there's going to be. I haven't really watched the news today. Um, I think that's important. This is an area where I disagree with reform. There's anti-EU, anti-Europe. That's it. There's no sense of balance. There's no sense of it's just that I honestly think reform see France or Germany as a bigger problem than Russia. That's why I don't trust them. I think it makes all the sense in the world that we have good relations with our closest neighbours, similar sized economies. And it bugs me that reform voters have a problem with, for example, young Europeans studying in British universities, the free movement of young people. Why would they have a problem with that? We're not talking here about Islamist terrorists. We're talking about young Dutch, French, Czech, Polish students. You know, so if Starmer agrees to that, I'd have no problem with it. The reformers will kick up a stink. I don't know why. I mean, if you honestly feel threatened by a European student studying in the UK, I don't know what to say. I understand the concerns about the small boats and about illegal immigration. Starmer's toughened his stance on that, but I just don't understand the hostility to the free movement of young people, and I'm sick and tired of this idea of betraying Brexit. Any notion of trying to have better relations with our neighbours is not betraying Brexit. It's real politics and it's common sense. Um, and then they say, "Oh, we're not jingoistic." Well, it's hard not to see how that isn't jingoism. If you have a problem with someone simply studying here for no other reason than they're not breaking any laws, they're not, and actually they are contributing to the economy because they'll be spending money when they're in the UK. Um, there is definitely things that need to change in the immigration system. I agree with taking a harder line against illegal immigration, but even there, I don't think, for example, a Vietnamese girl who's doing nails and she may technically be working illegally, I don't think she's a threat in the way that Islamist terrorism is. I don't think she's a threat the way some boozed up thug, um, causing a nuisance in his neighbourhood is, i.e., antisocial behaviour. Starmer's talked tough on that. I'd reiterate what I've said before. Labour has very mixed messaging on crime. On one hand, Starmer and Cooper talk tough, and I welcome that because it shows they have some sense of public sentiment. Yet, we also have a situation where the prisons minister, and perhaps I'm giving him more importance than he warrants, he says we punish too many people. Recently, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, announced planned opening of three new prisons. Well, I welcome that. It will ease pressure on the system, but will it go ahead, or is that just platitudes? Is it just words? Um, we have a problem in the prison system. It's overcrowded. That does not mean I strongly, strongly disagree with Lord Timpson that it means we punish too many people. There are career criminals who don't get custodial sentences. I suppose you could argue that there's cases like the one I mentioned, the wife of the Conservative councillor, who shouldn't be in prison. But I think most people who are in prison do belong there, actually. This is not a case of, you shoplift and then you're thrown in prison. In many cases, they're repeat offenders. I don't believe in this country people are just thrown in prison on the first offence unless it's a very serious offence. So Timpson's being dishonest about that, and tone deaf. Um, so the rhetoric is sort of indicates that they have some sense of public sentiment, but they have to take this perception of two-tier policing seriously. Two-tier care is something that's going to stick. On the point about immigration, and crime, dismissing everything as far-right propaganda is lazy. Now, without question, the far right operate on the streets of Britain. Without question, they stoked up last year's violence by spreading disinformation. Groups like National Action, Combat 18, to a lesser extent, Patriotic Alternative. I would be very, very, very wary of those groups. What goes without saying. I think a lot of them are racist fags, despite what they might claim. Reform is not on that level. Farage has made a big thing of the fact that he won't allow any far right activists into his party, but it's also equally plausible that Reform is kind of the polite face of the, if not far right, populist right. And yeah, Reform has plenty of minority members, but there is unquestionably a hard right stance with Reform. Um, and I think there's a lack of compassion, frankly. I mean, I go along with tough on crime, controlling immigration, all of that. Um, but there is something to be said for compassion. Um, and I think Reform is borderline MAGA Republican. It's not quite as bad, but it's just like might is right. It's sort of I don't know. I just think they see compassion in society as somehow weakness, or I don't trust them in that regard. But that's going back to Reform. Now, this is where Labour really, really aggravates me. Labour should be a party of social justice and compassion and so on. Yet we have this sort of strange situation where Starmer pandered to woke orthodoxy and, all the divisive stuff that came with that. Yet in traditional Labour stuff like women's rights, Labour rights, the Labour Party today are out Torying the Tories. Their attitude to claimants, the way they've treated disabled claimants, the way they scapegoat people, the way they preside over the sanction culture, nothing has changed in the DWP. Arguably, it's got worse. The fact that you have Liz Kendall talking about pressuring airlines to hand over information of people. They're out Torying the Tories when it comes to scapegoating the unemployed, and it disgusts me. It's not even necessary politically because I don't think reform voters necessarily even see that as a major thing. Yes, it's true that there's a lot of people will believe what they read in the Daily Mail and the Sun and believe that all claimants are lazy dole scroungers. I don't think the pandering to that is overblown. I don't think it's necessary. And what Labour's going to find is if they pander too much to reform, they're going to lose left wing support to, I don't know, the Liberal Democrats or the SNP, possibly even the Greens. So it's very noticeable recently that Starmer's been trying to pander to some of those things. Clearly, if you're a reform voter, you'll feel that Labour is still, you won't see it that way, but the rest of us do see Labour pandering to reform sentiments. Not on every issue, not on the non-crime hate incident thing, certainly on immigration. I mean, there was this obnoxious post by the Prime Minister recently. It was absolutely beneath him, beneath his office. Where so we know you're angry about immigration. No, people are angry about illegal immigration. Even reform voters would say they're not necessarily angry about immigration. And it just has echoes of the hostile environment that led to the Windrush scandal. It's a worse sort of populism. That isn't about controlling immigration. It's a lazy platitude. Um, And frankly, on the wider issue of immigration, I'm sick of the negativity. I'm not a naive person. I do believe that we need some controls, and clearly there's people who should not be in this country, without question. I don't think that foreign criminals should be allowed to stay here, for instance. And again, I think reform has a point whereby you have High Court judges blocking the Home Office's attempt to deport foreign criminals. That is clearly wrong. Those High Court judges need to drag themselves into the real world and understand how the public feel about that. It's deeply undemocratic. Um, but the idea that all immigration is bad and even threatening to crack down on legal immigration. This isn't even about illegal immigration. This is about cracking down on legal immigration. What we're going to see is people not going to come to the UK at all. They're going to be put off. People are going to think Britain's a hostile environment. And what we'll find is it will bite us in the end. It will damage our economy. I think there's too much negativity around immigration. Um, there's also a cruel side to it, potentially splitting up families. Um, there's a lot of things about it. I just see a repeat of the Windrush scandal, not in the exact same format, but something along those lines. And yeah. Um, I think Starmer is far, far too cautious when it comes to Trump. In fact, today, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, criticized the Prime Minister for his pandering to Trump. Didn't use those words, but you know, I think the perception was that sending out a state invitation at a time when Trump is threatening the very sovereignty of one of our closest allies is is wrong, and I'd have to agree with Carney. There seemed to be this, Starmer just seems determined not to provoke Trump. Yes, at that Oval Office meeting, he did correct him the way Macron did. There's still this notion that, I mean, I don't think we should be rolling out the red carpet anytime soon for Donald Trump. Just because of his office doesn't mean that he has an automatic right to it. China is another area where Labour is disastrously wrong. And I don't even think it's naivety. I think worse, they are putting supposed growth of the economy above national security. Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, and David Lammy have to explain that. And it's a great pity because when it comes to Russia, I think they've got it right. So the EU reset, Russia, they've got it right. But I struggle to see much else, quite honestly. Um, there has been proposals to increase sentencing for criminals who don't show up to the trials, things like that. But it's all relatively minor. I'm not enthusiastic about the Labour Party right now. I would say I'm disappointed, but then I was never overly optimistic to begin with. I've been around long enough to know how politics works. Um, the thing that perhaps I find most disappointing about Labour is their approach to welfare, the way that they have, for Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall to say, oh, well, thousands of disabled claimants are fit to work. I would like Liz Kendall to spend a bit of time in the shoes of someone who has fibromyalgia or another debilitating condition. Um, I think broadly speaking, the DWP doesn't treat claimants well because the public see it as people getting money from the state. They don't realize that there's very strict obligations, like 30-hour a week job searches. And if you actually do the maths on it, that works out at a minuscule amount. So claimants are told treat it like a job, and yet they're not paid like a job. I think that's wrong. Um, I think the 30 hours a week thing is nonsense. No one is going to search for 30 hours a week because even if you apply for job after job, you know, what Reeves and Kendall forget is it's also up to employers to actually offer people an interview. Punishing claimants because they're not given interviews um, is grotesque. I think there's a real problem in the DWP, the real something for nothing culture, or the real problem, the real scandal is the sanction culture that goes on there. So I think it's cowardly, actually, to scapegoat people who can't really defend themselves. Um, and I just don't like this pandering to reform. Um, so what would I like to see from Labour? I'd like to see them have a more consistent message regarding crime. Yeah, I welcome the tough stance, but I'd like it to be more consistent. I'd like Starmer and Cooper to wake up and see how angry people are and how disillusioned they are about the police prioritising non-crime hate incidents and the very real concern that freedom of speech is under attack in this country, because that reflects on the government of the day, even if it was going on under previous governments. Um, I'd like Starmer to continue trying to seek good relations with the rest of the EU. He's going to get heat for that, but He has to do it. Today, along with, I believe, France and another country, I think it was the Netherlands, there was a condemnation of what Israel's doing in Gaza. I'm pleased to see that. I'm pleased to see Starmer speaking out a little bit more on that. But frankly, so long as we arm Israel, even if it's minuscule, we're going to be morally compromised. Starmer has to cut off all arms now, right now, because what Israel's doing is an abomination. And yes, he'll get a lot of heat from the right. He'll get heat from GB News, from the Mail, from the Daily Telegraph, from the Tories. But as Prime Minister, that's the risk he has to take. It would be morally justified to cut off arms to Israel right now. Um, the tough stance on Russia, I support that. I think it's one thing Labour's got right, but that's just in continuity with the last Conservative government. If I'm giving Labour a mark out of 10, 5, and that's being generous. They've got it right on the EU, they've got it right on Russia. Domestically, there's not a lot to shout about. I think they're wrong about China. Um, I think, I mean, Rachel Reeves, she did say the EU is a more important trading partner than America, so that's good to see. But Starmer, I think, is far too cautious with Trump. I think sending out an invitation to that man at this time was wrong. Um, I try to be fair when I'm assessing any prime minister, but yeah, with Labour, you have to factor in that it takes time for any government to change, um, and to, progress from the shortcomings of the last government. But I don't think the Starmer really gets the anger that's out there on the perception of double standards and dismissing the notion that there's two-tier justice, two-tier policing, just offhand and saying it's a far right thing. One other big thing I didn't mention was the Supreme Court trans ruling. Um, Labour has to come out and say they support that the ruling. I believe they have, but it's still a perception that they've pandered to the trans lobby. Now, I've seen people in the trans lobby getting angry with Labour, but what I would respectfully say to them is the Supreme Court ruling isn't taking away any trans rights. It's simply asserting that biology matters. It's not, as far as I could see, it's not taking away any rights from trans people. So I think there's a bit of scaremongering going on there. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But, yeah, I'm disappointed by Labour. I won't vote for them, not until Starmer vocally speaks out against the issue of free speech in this country, not until he, steps away from this pandering to China, which compromises our national security. Um, and I'd like to see a bit more, frankly, left wing side of Labour, because in the end of the day, if that's not going to come from the Labour Party, you know, yeah, maybe the Lib Dems, but as much as they're doing quite well, they're not going to be in government in the next election. So I think Labour seriously risks, Starmer seriously risks losing left wing support. You can't underestimate that. It could be in its desire to pander to reform, they're taking their eye off the ball regarding left wing support, and that would be a serious mistake.